Right. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today to talk about sea turtles. So my name is Rebecca Germany. I'm the Sea Turtle Conservation Assistant at Gumbo Limbo Nature Center. And today I want to talk a little bit about the work that our conservation team does, some of the research projects that we've participated in. We have 3 resident sea turtles that we care for, so I'll introduce them. And finally, share some ways that you can help sea turtles during this nesting season. Right, so there are 7 species of sea turtles that are found throughout the world, and all of them are listed as threatened or endangered. 3 of those species, those are the loggerhead, the leatherback, and the green, nest in South Florida. And then 2 other species, the hawksbill and the Kemp's Ridley, can be found in Florida waters and very occasionally nest here, but we only get a handful of those nests each season. So today I'll just be talking about the 3 that regularly nest on our beaches. But the leatherback is the first species that nests. They're the largest species of sea turtle in the world. And on average, they can weigh about 600 to 900 pounds. But the largest on record was actually over 2,000 pounds. So you can see the size of these animals in the 3rd picture from the left compared to one of our conservation staff. Leatherbacks are also really special because they're the only sea turtle species that has a soft carapace, which is their back shell. So this is an important feeding adaptation for them so that they can hunt their favorite food, which are jellyfish and salps. And they can actually dive up to a mile deep in the ocean to get those animals. And if they had a hard shell, those shells might crack under the pressure of the ocean. So these soft carapaces can compress and expand and keep them safe. The next sea turtle that we see nesting here is the loggerhead, and they are by far the most common species of sea turtles that nest in South Florida. So Florida can actually claim the highest nesting population of loggerhead sea turtles in the world. And these species are much smaller than the leatherback, as you can see. They reach about 200 to 300 pounds fully grown. Their defining feature is their giant head, which is also an important feeding adaptation. About 80% of that head is jaw muscle, and they have a very powerful bite so that they can eat all of their favorite foods, which includes crab, lobster, and other crustaceans. Their bite is actually so strong that they can crunch through a conch shell to get the animal inside. And then finally, we have the green sea turtle. These are the largest of the hard-shelled sea turtles, coming in at around 400 to 500 pounds fully grown. Unlike loggerheads, though, they have a very small head in proportion to their body. Because they don't need those large jaw muscles to eat crunchy prey like the loggerheads. As adults, they actually prefer mostly seagrasses and algae, and they eat so much of that green food that it tints their internal fat a greenish color, which is where they get their name. So sea turtle nesting season here in South Florida runs from March 1st to October 31st. So season just started for us in Boca. And during this time, female sea turtles will come on shore in the middle of the night to lay their eggs. They always come out after dark so that they're better hidden and protected from predators. While they're nesting, sea turtles are very easily spooked. So any bright lights, loud noises, or movements could actually scare them away from laying their eggs. And as I say that, I'm showing a picture of a sea turtle during the day, and you'll notice the rest of the pictures in this presentation are during the day. These were actually rare and lucky occurrences when we saw the sea turtle on the beach, still finishing up her nesting process as we came out in the morning. And even though the season spans from March to October, each species has a shorter, more specific period when they come on shore to nest. Leatherbacks are the first nesters that we see coming in early March, and they'll nest through June. And sometimes we'll even get a few leatherback nests in mid to late February. So our first nest this year was actually February 22nd. Loggerheads are the next to come on shore, and they'll start nesting in mid-April and go through August. And then we get the greens, and they nest from about mid to late June through the end of September, a little bit into October. So as you can see, there's a lot of overlap in their seasons. So May through August are especially busy months for our team. Now I want to get a little bit more into what our conservation team actually does to research, monitor, and protect these sea turtles. We work out of Gumbo Limbo Nature Center. And so if you're not familiar with that, it's a nature center in A1A, or along A1A in Boca Raton. And we have marine aquariums, a marine research lab, a sea turtle rehabilitation facility, and nature trails. We also provide a lot of educational programs for all ages, and a lot of other activities. So if you haven't been, I highly recommend a visit. Our team is composed of 2 full-time and 6 part-time staff, and our main responsibility is surveying the beach every single morning during sea turtle nesting season. Our program actually started in 1979, so we have nesting data going back over 45 years. In addition to monitoring the beach, our team responds to sick and injured sea turtles. We care for 3 resident non-releasable sea turtles that live in Gumbo Limbo's aquariums. And we lead outreaches and educational programs like our very popular Turtle Walk and Hatchling Release programs. So we have a lot going on in our department, and I'm going to go into a little bit about all of that today. A little bit more about nesting surveys. They occur every single morning during sea turtle nesting season. Our team is out on the beach before sunrise every day in every type of weather to find and document all of the sea turtle nesting activity that happened the night before. We monitor 5 miles of Boca Raton's beach. And as I mentioned before, nesting usually happens in the middle of the night, so it's very rare that we actually see the sea turtle on the beach. But what we do instead is use the clues and tracks in the sand to determine what happened, where the turtle went, whether a nest was laid, and where the eggs might be. And I say whether a nest is laid because about half of the time a turtle comes on shore, they don't end up laying their eggs. This is called a false crawl or a non-nesting emergence. False crawl is shown in the picture on the right. And you can see the turtle tracks came out of the water, crawled up the beach a little bit, but then made a U-turn and headed right back down to the ocean. So these false crawls can occur if the turtle was scared away or if she just decided that that wasn't the right spot for her to lay her eggs. We still take data on all of these crawls, but we don't mark them off. On the left side, you can see an example of a nest. And we can tell a turtle nested when we follow the tracks and they lead to a large area of disturbed sand. So that's our clue that she dug around and laid her eggs in the sand. And the eggs will be somewhere in that fluffy mound. We'll mark that area off with stakes and flagging tape, and then we'll monitor that nest every day throughout its incubation period. One of the most common questions that we get is how we know which species of sea turtle laid a nest. And we can actually tell that by the tracks in the sand. So each sea turtle species has a distinctive track mark that they leave behind in the sand, almost like a footprint. The leatherbacks on the far left are pretty easy to identify because, like I said, these are the largest turtles. So they have very, very wide tracks. The stake, the orange stake in this picture is actually about 3 feet long. So that track is probably at least 6 feet wide. Leatherbacks also crawl using both flippers at the same time, kind of like swimming the butterfly stroke. So their flipper marks end up aligning and match up with each other. The picture in the center are the loggerhead tracks. They are much smaller and have comma-shaped flipper marks that they leave in the sand, and they crawl with an alternating gait. So one flipper after the other. and that makes their flipper marks a little offset from each other. Then on the far right, we have the green tracks, and those look a lot like the leatherbacks. They also crawl using the butterfly stroke with both flippers at once. So their flipper tracks align, but their tracks are not nearly as wide as the leatherback tracks. And if you remember the specific nesting seasons, they come up a lot later in the summer. So we can also use timing cues to figure out which species laid the track. So in addition to looking for new sea turtle crawls and marking off nests every morning, we also go up and down the beach each day and check every single nest on the beach for signs of predation, signs of whether the nest was washed over or washed out by the tide, any other disturbance that might have happened to that nest, or whether the nest has hatched. And so speaking of hatch outs, since I mentioned them, I had to share this video of a nest hatching. And again, like nesting, this usually happens in the middle of the night. So this is one of the very rare instances where we saw a nest hatching in the early morning, right as we got on the beach at sunrise. So what we usually see instead is something like this. This is evidence that the nest had hatched the night before, and we can tell that by the slight divot in the sand in the middle of the nest area where the egg chamber was, and then tons of tiny turtle tracks leading out of the nest and to the ocean. Whenever a nest hatched, we'll mark it off, and then 3 days later, we'll come back to that nest to excavate and inventory all the contents. And we collect data on how many eggs hatched and how many didn't hatch to determine how successful that nest was. And we do that for every nest that we mark on our beach, so we're able to calculate the total hatch success of our beach each year. And last season, we found a hatch success of 57%, which means that a little bit more than half of the eggs on our beach successfully incubated, hatched out of the egg, and made it out of the nest. And for hatch outs, for excavations, for all of the activity that I've already mentioned, we take a lot of data. We'll document the species, location of the nest, type of crawl, distance from the water, distance from the dune, dates of predations and washovers, and everything else. So in the field, we do that by using iPads and GIS software on those iPads. And we're able to connect them with GPS receivers to take the exact coordinates of every crawl. And then we're able to map them like you see in the map on the right. And with all of that data, we can analyze it and present it in different ways. So here is a very general summary of last year's nesting season, just looking at how many nests versus false crawls each species had. So last year you can see we had 19 total leatherback crawls, or nests, sorry, and no false crawls. They don't typically false crawl. For loggerheads, we had 824 total nests and 1,763 false crawls. And then for greens, we had 72 nests and 124 false crawls last year. So total nests, 915. You can see the false crawls and the total crawls. And overall, we saw that about 67% of the time that a turtle came on shore, they false crawled. And since our program has been documenting these data and these nesting trends nesting over the decades, we're able to look at the trends over the years. So this is a graph of the leatherback nests in Boca since 1987. And all of the graphs you'll see go back to 1987 because that's when we have the comprehensive data set for all 5 miles of our beach. And you can see that over the years, the leatherbacks have been increasing. We typically see recently about 15 to 20 nests each year. And then these are the loggerheads. As I said before, the loggerheads are the most common species that we see. There was a little dip in nesting in the early 2000s, but the numbers have been pretty consistent since then at around 800 to 900 nests per year. And then finally, we have the green trends over the years, and I think this graph is the most dramatic. This was the species that was historically harvested for its meat, and their population was almost hunted to extinction. So in the 1970s, that became illegal, and their populations began to rebound after that. And that's what's causing that huge upwards trend in their nest numbers, part of why. And then you can also see that they have a very cyclical pattern of nesting. So they have very high years with lots of nests and low years with only a few. And all species of turtles actually follow this trend, but it's most obvious in the green nesting numbers. This is because sea turtles don't actually nest every single year. They'll lay multiple nests in one season, usually about 4 to 6 nests each year. And then they'll usually take 1 or 2 years off to rest and regain strength before they begin nesting again. And then this final graph shows all of the species together, and you can get a much better idea of how many more loggerheads we see than any of the other 2 species. And you can also really see that cyclical nesting pattern in the green sea turtle numbers. So now I want to go a little bit more into some of the specific research projects that we do on our beach. And the first is a long-term collaborative study with Florida Atlantic University. So this study looks at how sand temperatures in the nests affect the sex ratio of sea turtles. To do this, we use a small temperature recording device called a data logger, as you can see in the far left picture. And whenever we deem a nest a research nest, we will dig into that nest on the day it's laid to locate the eggs and place the data logger in the center of that egg clutch. Then we'll rebury the eggs and let the nest incubate as normal. The data logger records the temperature of that nest throughout its entire incubation period. Then when the nest hatches, we'll collect all of the hatchlings and bring them to the FAU Marine Lab, which is located right on our site at Gumbo Limbo. They'll raise those hatchlings until they reach a certain size, usually about the size of your palm. And when they do that, they're able to actually do a small procedure and figure out whether those hatchlings are male or female. And they compare that to the temperature of the nest. And through this study, we have learned that warmer sand temperatures produce more females and cool sand temperatures produce more males. So we remember that by thinking hot chicks and cool dudes. And what we've also found is that the vast majority of sea turtles born on Boca beaches are female. We have very hot sand temperatures, which leads to a lot of female productions. There are some years that the sand temperature is so hot that we see 100% of the nests sampled have females. So having more females than males is not a huge problem at the moment, since one male can mate with multiple females and continue the population, but it could mean major problems in the future if the sands continue to get hotter and hotter and less males are being produced. Another research project that some of our staff conducted on our beach about 2 years ago was looking at how beach renourishment projects affect sea turtle nesting. Beach renourishment is a solution that adds more sand to the beach to solve the problem of erosion. What they'll do is a dredge offshore will pull sand from offshore environments and pump it onto the beach. Then construction equipment on the beach will move that sand around and rebuild the beach to make it wider. So we wanted to look at how this process and how the new offshore sand would affect where sea turtles laid their nests. And how we did that was to compare the location of nests on the renourished beach to those on a control beach that was not renourished. So for every nest that was laid, we take measurements from the water line to the dune, and then from the water line to the nest, and then from the nest to the dune. And so we're able to map where that nest is on the beach. And then we compare these measurements between the renourished beach and the control beach. And what we found was that on average, nests on the renourished beach were laid closer to the water. So the control beach that was not renourished, nests on average were laid about 41 feet from the tide line. The renourished beach that had the new sand, the nests were about 6 feet closer to the tide line. But that distance also changed throughout the season for the renourished beach. So this graph is a little busy, but I'll try and explain it. What it shows is that all of the nests laid on the control and renourished beach during the 2023 season. So the orange dots are nests on the control beach that was not renourished, and the blue dots are nests on the renourished beach. The x-axis just shows the date that that nest was laid throughout the season, and the y-axis shows how far that nest was from the water line. So the orange trend line for the control beach shows that those nests were very consistently, on average, about 40 feet from the water, and that didn't change. The blue trend line, though, shows that at the beginning of the season, nests on the renourished beach were laid very close to the water line, around 20 feet. And then as the season progressed, those nests started to get further up on the beach. And why that matters is because nests close to the water have a much higher risk of washing out or drowning the eggs. This is a picture of a nest on the renourished beach that was laid too close to the water line. And you can see that the tide eventually washed all of the sand in front of that nest away and started washing out the eggs. So we want to use the information from this project to better inform beach renourishment projects about how and when they should run so that they don't negatively affect sea turtle nesting. All right, switching gears a little bit from research, I want to introduce our Gumbo Limbo resident sea turtles. So these are sea turtles who were injured and brought to rehabilitation facilities, but because of their injuries, they were not able to be released back to the wild. Instead, they live in the aquariums at Gumbo Limbo and are educational ambassadors for their species. So in these pictures, from left to right, we have Lady McNubbins, Morgan, and Lefty. Lady McNubbins is a subadult female green sea turtle, and she's about 10 to 15 years old. She was stranded in Brevard County in 2008, missing both of her front flippers. The injury was most likely due to a predator attack, but since the flippers were mostly healed when she stranded, it's not totally certain what the cause was, and it could have also been due to a boat strike or fishing line entanglement. She was treated by the Sea Turtle Healing Center at the Brevard Zoo, but because of her missing flippers, she was deemed non-releasable because she wouldn't be able to swim fast enough to avoid threats in the ocean. So she was brought to Gumbo Limbo and is now a temporary foster resident while her permanent home at the Brevard Zoo's future aquarium is being complete. Morgan also lives in our shipwreck tank with Lady McNubbins, and she is also a subadult female green sea turtle. She stranded in 2014 after she was struck by a boat in Stewart County, and she was brought to our rehab center here at Gumbo Limbo Nature Center for care. So after months of rehabilitation, the boat strike on her carapace was healed and she was completely healthy, but the boat strike caused a couple of additional problems. It caused paralysis in her back flippers and a buoyancy issue. So because of both of those things, she will also not be able to be released back in the wild. The buoyancy issue means that there's gases trapped in her tissues, and the back side of her carapace floats upwards, and she might float on the surface and not be able to dive for her food or to rest on the bottom of the ocean. So here at Gumbo Limbo, we attach weights on the back of her shell, and you can see those in the picture. And that helps counteract that buoyancy issue so she can swim and dive regularly in our deep tank. But it's not a permanent solution because the weights do occasionally fall off and have to be reapplied, and they will have to be increased slightly as she grows larger. And then finally, we have Lefty. He is an adult male Kemp's Ridley sea turtle. And I didn't talk much about Kemp's Ridleys because they don't nest here on our beaches, but they are the rarest, most endangered, and smallest sea turtle species in the world. So he is a very special resident here at Gumbo Limbo. He stranded in the early 1990s, and we actually don't have many records on him. But like Lady McNubbins, he's missing both of his front flippers, and that's most likely due to a predator attack. So he can't swim or dive very well in deep waters, and he lives in our mangrove, our shallow water mangrove aquarium. So all of these resident sea turtles were initially rescued through the Florida Fish and Wildlife Stranding and Salvage Program, which our conservation team is a part of. And we have a 24-hour sea turtle emergency line that people can call if they see a sick, injured, or deceased sea turtle on the beach or in the water. And we will respond and rescue these sea turtles. And then we'll coordinate with FWC to determine where to bring them for treatment. As you can see in the pictures, we have rescued sea turtles of all species and sizes with all different types of injuries. And for some of these more difficult rescues, we've relied on like police marine units, ocean rescues, or other organizations to get some of the offshore turtles or turtles that were in difficult areas. We also help rescue and protect hatchling sea turtles. So hatchlings on the beach at night is a very normal occurrence and should not be disturbed. So most of the time that you do see hatchlings, they've just hatched out of their nests and they're crawling to the ocean, and that's completely natural. But there are a couple of occurrences, a couple of situations where they are endangered and should be helped. And some of those situations are if a hatchling is on the beach during the day, it likely hatched out the night before, but never made it to the ocean and is wandering around on the beach at risk of overheating once the sun comes up. If the sea turtle or if the hatchling is visibly injured, that's another case where it might need rescue. Or if it's crawling the wrong direction into the dunes or another place that it's unsafe to be, like parking lots or pool decks. We've seen some in storm drains, anywhere like that. In those kind of situations, it's encouraged to collect that hatchling and bring it to Gumbo Limbo Nature Center. And we actually have a hatchling drop-off box on the front porch of our nature center, right by the entrance doors, where people can place hatchlings that need our help. When and if you transport these hatchlings, they should be transported in damp sand and not water. Because if they are sick or weak or injured in any way, then they might be too weak to swim, and there's a possibility of them drowning. Our team checks that drop-off box regularly, and we care for the hatchlings that we get in. If they're strong enough to be released, then we will hold them for the day and then release them at night when it's safest to go out. So far I've talked all about how our conservation team works to protect and rescue sea turtles, but there are a ton of ways that you can help as well. And so for this last part of the talk, I want to go over just a few ways to help keep sea turtles safe this nesting season. If you are on the beach, there are 3 main things that you can do to help. The 3 rules that we have for being on the beach is to keep it clean, keep it flat, and keep it dark. Keeping it clean obviously means no trash. Take everything that you brought with you off the beach when you leave. And participate in beach cleanups if you can to help keep the beach free of marine debris. Keeping it flat means to fill in any holes that are on the beach, knock down any sand castles that you might make, or remove any obstacles that might get in the way of a sea turtle nesting or crawling to the ocean. If a sea turtle encounters an obstacle on the beach, they might get scared and end up false crawling without laying their eggs. And huge holes, like the one in the top left picture, can be extremely dangerous for hatchlings or nesting adults that could fall into that hole and get stuck. And keeping it dark means to reduce lights on the beach. So as we talked about before, nesting sea turtles use darkness to hide from predators while they're up on shore, and they can be scared away from nesting if there are bright lights in the area. Both hatchlings and adult sea turtles also use light cues to help them find the ocean. Historically, the brightest horizon was over the water. It would have been caused by the moon and the starlight reflecting on the waves, and sea turtles would instinctively crawl in that direction to get to the ocean. Now, light pollution over land causes the brightest horizon to be inland. And so sea turtles, and especially hatchlings after they've hatched out of their nest, they sometimes disorient and crawl in the wrong direction because they are being attracted to those lights inland. And so here's a few ways that you can help sea turtles if you're in the water. If you're a boater or fisher, make sure you go slow for those below. Obey all of the low wake zones and no wake zones, especially while you're near shore or in the intercoastal area, because that's where sea turtles like to hang out, and especially these green sea turtles who eat the seagrasses and algae on the ocean bottom are in shallow water areas. Sea turtles also need to come to the surface to breathe, and especially during nesting season, there are a lot in the nearshore area and near the surface. And then if you fish, make sure that you properly dispose of your fishing line. Fishing line entanglements can be extremely dangerous to all marine animals and can be fatal to sea turtles or cause them to lose their flippers. And finally, there are ways that everyone can do every day, even if you aren't on the beach or you don't live anywhere close to a beach. And the biggest thing that we can do is to refuse single-use plastics. So we've all heard of reduce, reuse, recycle, but now there's a fourth R, and that's refuse. So not using plastic to begin with. Because all of that plastic that's being used ends up in our environment, and it never really goes away. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. And balloons are an especially important one, for me at least. When balloons are released, either intentionally or unintentionally, they don't float away and disappear. They have to come down somewhere, and they typically land in the ocean or in a body of water that leads to the ocean. So we sometimes see dozens of balloons that have washed up on shore in just a week. So instead of continuing to contribute to all of that plastic pollution, you can switch to sustainable items like reusable shopping bags and water bottles. And you can choose more sustainable decorations instead of balloons, like paper streamers or beads to decorate with. And then the second item there, we can also help by eating sustainable seafood. And that means seafood that is fished according to regulations that help keep sea turtles and other marine life safe. And so this might mean that fisheries use things like turtle excluder devices that prevent bycatch, or they fish during seasons where marine life is less likely to be impacted. And the Monterey Bay Aquarium has a great program called Seafood Watch, where you can learn more about how to choose sustainable seafood. You can do that by visiting seafoodwatch.org. And then finally, we've already talked about lights on the beach, but even if you're not on or even near the beach, you can still help reduce light pollution by using wildlife-friendly lights, such as lights that have shielded fixtures, like the light in the picture on the far right. Shielded lights help direct light onto the ground where that light is meant to go, instead of shining it up into the atmosphere and wasting all of that light. So unshielded lights, like the one on the far left, they contribute to what's called sky glow, which is the brightening of the atmosphere. And even lights very far inland can add to this sky glow and cause sea turtles on the beach to disorient. So there are plenty of other ways to help, but I just wanted to highlight some of these simple ones. Maybe there's one that we discussed that you can start doing. You don't have to do all of them, and everybody doesn't have to do everything, but everyone doing a little something adds up to make a big difference. All right, so that's all I have today. I want to thank you all again so much for being here. I hope you learned something new and maybe were a little bit more inspired to help protect sea turtles this season. My info and Gumbo Limbo info is on the screen, and I think we have plenty of time if we want to have any questions.
All right, so if you guys have any questions, you're more than welcome to leave it in the chat box. But we also, if you want to unmute yourselves and ask, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And then